Good day, dear students. Theme of the first lecture is Old English Literature. The following questions are to be discussed today. Introduction, Course of English Literature and Translation Problems, its aims and significance. Old English Literature, Beowulf and the problems of its translation. Anglo-Saxon literature, the 7th and 11th centuries. English literature periods are divided into the following: Old English, Middle English, Renaissance, Elizabethan, Jacobean, Restoration, 18th century, Romantic, Victorian, and Modern. Old English is the first recorded English literature. The alliterative verse of Cadman was mentioned in the Venerable Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People in the 8th century. Manuscripts from about 1000 contain the best-known Old English work, Beowulf, a heroic poem written about 700 to 750. Such poems were originally written to be sung, and the subject matter was generally religious or heroic. In prose, they were plain narrative historical chronicles, such as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Middle English begins with the Norman conquest of 1066. This brought both the French language, which in time combined with the Germanic Anglo-Saxon to form the basis of modern English, and the French literary influence. The Arthurian cycle became the central myth for English literature. Geoffrey Chaucer, master of complex narrative and sometimes presented as the first modern English writer, occupies the central position in Middle English literature. He combined the classical, epic, and the European philosophical influence in his Troilus and Crusade, but also gave the vernacular a solid basis in his comic Canterbury Tales. The European Renaissance had filtered into England by the 16th century and led to the questioning of the religious beliefs and assumptions of the Middle Ages. Literature began to look back beyond the medieval period to the classics for inspiration, and Neoplatonism, through Edmund Spenser and lyrical courtly poetry, became the dominant philosophical theme. Humanism emerged in Sir Philip Sidney's defense of poesy, the beginnings of English literary criticism in Francis Bacon's works. As the central figure of the English Renaissance, Shakespeare expresses both its conflicts and its glorious energy and provides the basis for its reputation as the golden age of English literature and English drama in particular. The 18th century contains two major literary currents. The first current was of the Augustan Age, or neoclassical period, marked by the appearance of a literary elite and exemplified by the more heroic satires of Alexander Pope, the pamphleteering and allegory of Jonathan Swift, perhaps the greatest satirist in the language, and the criticism of Samuel Johnson. journalism and the prose essay flourished, both influencing and being nurtured by this movement, as seen in Joseph Edison's periodical The Spectator. Of great importance is the rise of novel as an independent literary form on the works Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding, and Samuel Richardson. The second current in the 18th century literature was Romanticism, which was in part a reaction against the elitism and self-imposed classical limitations of the Augustans. It began with William Blake's poetry of rebellion against convention and with the creation of a new mythology of the imagination. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge were central to the movement, producing a manifesto to romantic beliefs in the preface to their joint lyrical ballads. These poets concentrated on the universal power of nature and imagination and turned away from the grayness of increasing industrialization. The Romantic movement includes widely disparate elements. However, from the lyrical sensuality of John Keats to the complex literary criticism in Coleridge's Biographia Literaria, Beowulf and the Problems of the Poem Rale's Translation. The Angles, Saxons and Jutes who invaded Britain in the 5th and 6th centuries brought with them the common Germanic meter, but of their earliest oral poetry, probably used for panegyric, magic, and short narrative, little or more none survives. For nearly a century after the conversion of King Ethelbert I of Kent to Christianity in 597, there is no evidence that the English wrote poetry in their own language. Beowulf is a heroic poem, the highest achievement of Old English literature and the earliest European vernacular epic, preserved in a single manuscript from 1000. It deals with the events of the early 6th century and is believed to have been composed between 700 and 750. It did not appear in print until 1815. Although originally untitled, it was later named after the Scandinavian hero Beowulf, whose exploits and character provide its connecting theme. There is no evidence of a historical Beowulf, but some characters, sites, and events in the poem can be historically verified. Beowulf belongs metrically, stylistically, and thematically to the inherited Germanic heroic tradition. Many incidents, such as Beowulf's tearing off the monster's arm and his descent into the mere, are familiar motifs from folklore. The ethical values are manifestly the Germanic code of loyalty to chief and tribe and vengeance to enemies. Yet the poem is so infused with a Christian spirit that it lacks the grim fatality of many of the Eddic lays or the Icelandic sagas. It is significant that his three battles are not against men, which would entail the retaliation of the blood fluid, but against evil monsters, enemies of the whole community and of civilization itself. Many critics have seen the poem as a Christian allegory, with Beowulf, the champion of goodness and light against the force of evil and darkness. His sacrificial death is not seen as tragic, but the fitting end of a good, some would say too good, hero's life. The next question is Anglo-Saxon literature. The Anglo-Saxon literature of the early Britons changed greatly under the influence of Christianity, which penetrated into the British Isles in the 3rd century. The religious books brought by the Roman monks were all written in Latin. No wonder poets and writers imitated those Latin books about early Christians and also made up stories of their own about saints. The names of two of those early poets have reached our days, that is Cadman and Kenilworth. Cadman is the first Old English Christian poet whose fragmentary hymn to the creation remains a symbol of the adaptation of the aristocratic heroic Anglo-Saxon verse tradition to the expression of Christian themes. All of his poetry was on sacred themes, and its unvarying aim was to turn man from sin to righteousness. In spite of all the poetic renderings that Cadman supposedly made, however, it is only the original dream hymn of 9 historical pressures, but poetically uninspired lines that can be attributed to him with confidence. Venerable Bede's works fall into three groups: grammatical and scientific, scriptural commentary, and historical and biographical. His earliest works include treatises on spelling, hymns, figures of speech, verse, and epigrams, although overloaded with the miraculous. It is the work of a scholar anxious to assess the accuracy of his sources and to record only what he regarded as trustworthy evidence. It remains an indispensable source for some of the facts and much of the feel of early Anglo-Saxon history. Along with the religious poetry, folk tales about worldly affairs were written down at the monasteries and put into verse by poets. These were wedding songs, songs to be sung at feasts, war songs, death songs, and even riddles. In the 11th century, these were prohibited by church. Thank you for attention.